Right, so what I want to do today is really to get us to think a little bit more broadly about the creation of open source, the use of open source, and think a little bit about how we can encourage more users to use open source and more users to contribute to it. Because 15 minutes isn't that long, I'm going to be giving some examples or slightly sort of tongue-in-cheek sort of pictures, just to try and kind of get the message to stick, as it were. I know it's the end of a long day, so I won't do a very kind of dry talk. I'll try and do something that's a little bit more kind of jovial and animated, but there's a serious message underneath that. Why do I feel like I can offer some thoughts around this? Well, I guess I've been using open source since around probably 1995, maybe a little bit earlier than that. So I've been around the block a little bit. And in that time, I've seen what works and what hasn't worked. I'm not saying I'm an expert, but I have picked up some kind of life experience. I currently run an algorithmic art group. It's got 4,000 members. Currently paused because of the COVID thing. I run Data Science Cornwall. I run a kids code club. I'm the author of a few books, which is very much enabled thanks to open source. Without open source, I wouldn't be able to do that. In fact, I wouldn't even have a career. So open source has been really transformational. I've worked in government as well, playing a role as trying to kind of remove some of the barriers to the adoption of open source in government. This was around sort of 5 to 10 years ago with GDS and so on, and trying to kind of break the kind of the monopoly, as it were, of some of the big corporations around government tech. And my sort of silly claim to fame is that around 95, 96, 97, I think I installed the first Linux workstation in the British civil nuclear sector. I was told I was the first to make that claim myself, so it goes back some way. Just some pictures of some of the things that I run, and the reason I'm showing you this is just to sort of say I have spoken to people and worked with people, young and old, and the young ones are particularly interesting users to learn from. People who are sort of kids who are 7 to about 14. If you can make open source work for them, if you can make technology work for them, then you've cracked, I'd say, 80% of the problem. Before I do dive in, I do recognize that there are different kinds of open source projects. There are small ones, which are personal projects, and I have no right to sort of tell you how you should run your project or what you should do, but you might choose to take on board some of the things I say. Small means you don't have a lot of resources. I can't telling you to spend lots of money in order to improve the access to your project isn't really going to work. And then we have medium-sized projects and very large ones, which have a lot of resources, quite often kind of funds that are organized through charities and foundations, and they have a little bit more luxury in terms of thinking about how to remove the barriers to participation. So what I'm going to do is, in a slightly random way, I'm going to go through just a series of 5 observations, and some of them will sound really obvious to you, some of them might not, and I hope they're just sort of food for thought. So it struck me, actually, as I was thinking the other day, that over the last sort of, I don't know how many years it's been, open source is fantastic. It's a huge amount of talent, huge amount of energy, lots of people working, giving their own time, and that's something that no other sector has that amount, and that's great. But there is a bias, there is a kind of dominance by an enthusiasm for technology. Lots of people in it are enthused by, whether it's JavaScript or whether it's the BSD kernel or whether it's network protocols. A lot of it is about tech, and that gives the feel of the community a very tech-flavored feel, but it also colors some of the software we produce. It's very much dominated by our desire to be interested in and explore and play with and build things from a technology perspective, and it means that other valid interests and concerns perhaps are squeezed out a little bit or don't get a chance. So perhaps the software that comes out of the open source community doesn't have quite the influence of people who care about users and user needs and design and user experience. Of course, there are examples where a good job is done there, but I'm kind of looking at the whole kind of landscape, and I think most people would agree that there is a definite coloration towards tech versus some of the other fields. This is the first of one of my many silly examples I'm going to give today. So this is just the other day, on Twitter, as some of us are, and I saw somebody asking how do you take a screenshot and save it to a file automatically, and one of the many replies was referencing something called Pillow, which I think is a Python or it's an imaging library, and referring to a function, so you can create a script that runs in the background, and so on. And you think, well, you can see here the enthusiasm for the tech and finding intricate, interesting ways of solving a problem versus something which should be really simple. Just take a screenshot and save it to a file. So this to me struck out as, wow, how far have we got from solving an easy problem in an easy way? So that kind of highlighted to me, actually, there is an overdominance of tech and perhaps not enough representation of ease of use and simplicity. This isn't real statistics. This is just something I've made up. But I would like to see a continuing shift, and it has already started, of the open source community being made up of not just technologists and software developers, but people with different kinds of skills, people who are interested in understanding users, doing user research, interviewing users, working and testing software with users, people who are content designers, content creators in terms of creating documentation and tutorials, guides, design for software that faces humans that we use. It is evident that some software, as useful and technically capable as it is not intuitive at all. And I really like the mantra that I think Steve Jobs invented, which was, if it needs a manual, you've done something wrong. Now, I know that's not applicable totally, but it's an aspiration, I think, that we should aim for. And people who are good at organizing communities, working with communities, encouraging people to take part, breaking down some of the barriers. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But I think the open source community should have a higher representation of those other kinds of skills. And content and design is not just writing. It can be about graphics, it can be about visual design, it can be about music, it can be other kinds of creative skills as well. Here's an interesting journey. So this is me pretending that I've, actually, let me check, yeah. So the second observation was getting started is too hard. And this is an illustration here. So I'll get this little short 30-second video going. So I'm imagining that I bought a computer, it's got an AMD GPU, and I want to use it to accelerate my machine learning. So I type AMD machine learning on the web, and it takes me to this website, top of the list. And I can't understand it. It doesn't seem to say to me, well, this is what is RockM? It doesn't actually say what RockM is. It doesn't tell me how I can use it. It doesn't tell me what it does. I'm kind of struggling to look around the website. Maybe it's in this section. Nope. It tells me about TensorFlow. Am I open? Am I VisionX? Oh, it takes me to something on GitHub. I don't understand what that is. So I could carry on with that video in my search for getting started with an open source machine learning library for AMD. But that example I've just given you shows that actually, if I wanted to get started, there's an unnecessary barrier there. The website, which is the primary entrance to that world, hasn't helped me. It's sure, it looks well designed in terms of it's very slick. You can tell effort's gone into it. But the simple question of how do we make it easy for newcomers to find out what RockM is, and how do we get them started with perhaps examples, or even just putting 3 bullet points on the web page saying, this is what it is, this is what it does. Yes, that is an isolated example, but it's not that isolated. There are lots of other examples out there where just thinking about the perspective of a new user who wants to get started with your software, does your website help them, or does it throw them straight into a GitHub tree? So the third observation is related to that, not just getting started, but getting help. And unfortunately, fortunately, there is, the open source community is very generous. I would say, the vast majority of it's very, very kind of friendly and approachable. And we have meetups and conferences, and people want others to share and kind of take part. And that is good. But there is a minority that's very significant, unfortunately, which makes it hard for newcomers. And you've seen some of this toxicity around, calling people noobs and not helping people when they ask questions on Stack Overflow, and throwing RTFM at them and pointing to them at, So for many people who are getting started, it might surprise you, but not everyone knows what a GitHub issue is. Even the name isn't really giving it away. Telling people to do a pull request, that's not very helpful. So I think we need to be conscious of how we treat people who are new into the community, new into the use of our software, and remember that some of us or some of you in the audience might be very well knowledgeable and very well very intelligent about learning new things. A lot of people haven't had that luck, and need a little bit of support, and need a little bit of friendliness. And if that friendliness isn't there, people will get turned off and run away. I've been tempted to give up on things in the past just because of a few idiots. A fourth observation is focusing on what we've already said around design. I think, in my professional life over the last 20-something years, I've really realized, I've come to the conclusion, and not just myself, that you can have great technology, really cool techniques, great computer science, great algorithms, all the cool stuff going on, but if it's not usable, then it's not useful. To make things usable, we have to think about designing the whole round, understand who our users are, design for them, think about the content, the language we use on our web pages, in our software, think about the visual design. Are we overloading it? Is it intuitive? Are we minimizing the cognitive load? Just because you've created the software and you know what every button does, when a newcomer comes to your software, are they overloaded with a deluge of scary looking buttons that they might be afraid to touch? So design is really important, and thinking about what the users want to do. Those of you who are practiced and well versed in kind of agile, iterative, user-centered development know this, but not everyone does, and there's still a lot of software out there which clearly hasn't had design as a thought or even an afterthought. So a silly example, but in the number of times people, friends, humans, non-techies, civilians have said, I'd like to edit some images, or I'd like something to crop things, or just simple things. And the standard answer from the open source world was, there's more choice now, but it was the Gimp. But that in itself scares people away. Now, we can chuckle at it and call it the GNU image manipulation program, or whatever it's called. But something as trivial sounding as the name can scare people away. And I would honestly say we've scared a whole generation of people away just because of that name. Now you can chuckle, but that's if we really care about reducing barriers to the use of our software, these are the kinds of things you have to think about. What does our software appear like? What are the vibes it gives off? Here's another little thing that has bugged me, actually, and it's about making software intuitive, making software so that it has a low cognitive load, so it doesn't surprise you. Now, this is a silly example. It's a JavaScript puzzle thing, but there's a list of 3 numbers in an array or a list. I'm not a Java expert, and it sorts it, and you have to guess, well, which one is output. And you might think, is a trick 0 indexing and 1 indexing? But actually it's not. What happens here is that it sorts according to alphanumeric rather than numeric. And that's a surprise, and that's not, that's bad language design. So we have to think again about, yes, we can design software to function and behave in ways which might make sense to us, but we should check ourselves and say, well, what would be unsurprising, what would be intuitive, what would feel like a slow slope for normal people, for new entrants to use that software. There are good examples. I think more and more people are now starting to think about design. I know here, for example, is Firefox from the Mozilla kind of foundation, and increasingly they are looking at how people are using the browser. You can see here heat maps showing which buttons people press. Are we asking the question? Are we overloading the interface with buttons that people are afraid to click or scare them away? Everything that's on the screen becomes additive to the cognitive load. We don't want to do that. So the top left shows the results of a survey of what people do and don't press, and then the result was a redesigned interface where the buttons and the elements that are most used are more prominent, and things that aren't are hidden away. I'm not sure exactly the detail of this exercise, but we should be doing more of that. We should be monitoring how people use our software and testing, what confuses people. How often do we do that? We might, look at the list of issues on the GitHub, but how often do we actually talk to users and say, how did you find it? What surprised you? What was the thing that you thought, if only they'd explained it that way? So that kind of insight is really, really important. And as I said, I'll keep saying it, you have to balance the technology with usability. Otherwise, one without the other, there's no, you lose the value of it. Now, the long-standing perennial argument about this is the year we'll have Linux on the desktop. But related to that is the question of Microsoft Office versus LibreOffice and so on. And from I think it's a missed opportunity. Most people, when they are surveyed, and I haven't dug out the surveys, there's not enough of them. Most people just want to do the basic stuff: print, bold, underline, center, insert image, maybe a table, export as PDF. So why on earth do we throw all this stuff at them in an interface? It scares people. You think something's going to go wrong. And I'm talking about not technical experts. I'm talking about the vast majority of people who we want to be using open source home software like LibreOffice. So rather than trying to mimic Microsoft, and that's just there because it has an established monopoly, this is an opportunity to say, well, let's redesign this. Let's think about what do most people want to do? What are the top 5 user journeys? Design our interface for that. And sure, reveal the complex stuff for other users, but 80% of our users just want to do bold, underline, insert image. So that's the kind of thinking I think we should be doing more of. Here's potentially a good example. The point I'm trying to make here is make sure your software makes it easy to do the easy common stuff. So two-minute software that I've grappled with over the years, you have to bounce through quite a lot just to get it to do the core thing that it was designed to do. The approach should be, what are the top 3, 4, 5 things this software is going to be used to do? Let's make them easy. Then everything else requires configuration and options. So on the left is some complicated code so the task is simple. There's data about items, things which are either related or not related to each other. Let's visualize that as a graph. So the code on the left is using some Python library for building a network, a graph thing, and then visualizing it. And actually the code goes off the screen. But you ask yourself, hang on, all I want to do is take a bunch of data, columns of what's related to what. Let's make that assumption. If the assumption is broken, we can then go into configuration options and stuff. But most people will have data in that format. Let's make it really easy to do the thing that everyone wants to do, which is visualize it. So there's a different software which I think does a better job. You import the library, you have your data there, you check that it's right by visualizing it, and there's just one function call to say show it, and that's what it does. It shows the data. Now, of course, you can do a lot more with. There are more options. There are more kind of things you might want to do, but those are not the 80% of things that people want to do. So I think that example is done well. Make it easy to do the most common or easiest thing, and push your configuration and your complexity to the other use cases. Shall I blow my own trumpet? Yeah, I wrote that. You can Google it afterwards. I think the other thing around not just users, but people who create and are part of the kind of making of software, that community, and users, I think I've observed over the years that sometimes the communities can become very narrow or very exclusive or very elite, and ultimately they are at risk of dying out. Communities, which are the kind of the foundation of software, fizzle out, or they kind of go into a hole. And I've kind of realized, and this is my final point, is that it's really important to have a constant flow into your community. So in this pyramid, the top of the pyramid shows those people who are experts. They're the gurus. And if you just have events and meetups and documentation or whatever you do aimed at those top people, then they're going to die out. That's not going to grow. What you need to think about is establishing and maintaining a flow through that pyramid, so that you cater to intermediates. But to create intermediates, you need to cater to beginners. So for every expert, there might be 100 or 1,000 intermediates. For every one of those, there might be 100,000 beginners. So it's really important. And as I say, I've run, and I still run, 3-4 meetup groups. I used to run the co-run the London Python meetup group, and we doubled its size and activity by making this change, by doing more beginner-friendly events, by messaging and making it clear that beginners are welcome. Nobody's going to feel stupid or left out or kind of, scared. Because then you have people coming in, because everyone has to start at the beginning. So you have this flow. So I just want to signal to people here who might run groups, just be wary of, just focusing on the top of the pyramid. Make sure you have that flow. So coming to a conclusion in a way. So for small projects, people's personal projects, clearly you can't spend a lot of money and resources on this issue, but just make sure your web page is helpful. Tell people what it is. Put a tutorial, a guide, or an example on there, example of your code and use. It's amazing how much software doesn't do that, and that's a barrier that takes people away straight away. If you've grown a little bit, if you can dedicate more time, think about how you've designed your software. What's the function of the API? And think about things like, let's make the easy thing easy to do, or let's make the most common thing easy to do. The shape of your software and how it interfaces is important. We've seen so many examples over the years, over the past, where that wasn't a consideration at all. As you become a bigger project with more resources, you can invest in more engagement. People like videos. People search. The young people, especially, first thing to do is to solve a problem is not go to Stack Overflow, but go to YouTube. That's growing. So more and more people are doing that. So think about creating videos about introducing your software, showing its use, and that really resonates with people. It's what people want to see. They don't want to read if they can avoid it. Show worked examples, run tutorials, run workshops, have an organized help if this is where you can afford to do that. So not just people putting things on an issues list. Engage in social media, talk to people, find out what they're thinking, how they're using your software. And if you are one of the very large projects with lots of funding, then you really, really should be focusing a lot more on user research, testing, making sure that your software is optimally designed, thinking about content design for showing what your software does its documentation, thinking about the visual design. The best software out there, particularly from the commercial world, they understand that each degradation of, say, a user experience or a complicated UI is a fraction of users that are not going to be your customers. Think about community outreach, inclusion, because different skills, you want them part of the community. As I said at the start, we need to change that pie chart to be not dominated by technologists. We need other people involved. And at the moment, a lot of technology meetups don't give the vibe of being welcoming to people who are musicians or content designers or visual artists. We need to kind of move in the direction of changing that and that flow. Make sure there's always a steady flow of newcomers and income. Just otherwise you'll kind of die out and turn into a rabbit hole of expertise. The final thing, if you only take one thing away from this talk, is just put yourself in the shoes of the people you might be wanting to reach, whether it's a young new developer or even old tech-shy developer, somebody you think should be contributing to your software, or a user out there who's just found searching on the internet for something that might help solve their problem. Put yourself in their shoes. That's the only thing I'd ask. Great. I will stop there. I probably have gone over my time. I didn't see the clock, but I hope that was audible. I hope it gave you something to think about after you leave today.
That was fantastic. Thank you very much. Hopefully you can hear the applause from your end. Yeah, thumbs up.
Thank you. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, I think it's a real eye-opener. We do concentrate so much on the code and the developers, and there is so much more to open source than just that. Any questions on that talk from anyone? We don't have a question. We have a disagreement. Wow, this is exciting. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to paraphrase that entire sort of comment. It was a counterpoint to making things easy, that if you don't understand what a pull request is, I guess there's an onus on you to actually go and learn what a pull request is, and some things require complexity. I'm not sure that was a question. That was more of an observation, which is fine.
Thanks for repeating the question. Nothing that I've said is mandated, of course, but I think you'll find that those communities that make it easier to help people and don't tell them to go away and RTFM or find out what a pull request is or whatever it is, they will do better. If there are communities that don't do that, they might sustain, but they're always in danger of being superseded by friendly communities. So I'm not going to disagree with you. I'm not going to say do what I say, but I would just point out that it's the more friendly and open and welcoming groups that will stand a stronger chance of succeeding.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thanks for that, Tariq.